There are just certain players that will absolutely crush your week, and at this time of the year, we cannot afford to do that. So I've been doing this video the past some weeks. I've hit on some, I've missed on some. We're cleaning it all up today. These are guys that you just need to avoid in Week 9 fantasy football. All I ask is that you go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So our first guy we're getting into here is a guy that I have really loved for basically the last several weeks, and I in fact called Tank Bigsby a must-start several videos back, and it worked out. But this week, it's not going to work out for Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby is at the Philadelphia Eagles this week. And listen, like I just said, this is a guy that I've always really liked. And especially heading into the past several weeks without Travis Etienne, he's been a good play in fantasy football. The 2 games without Etienne that he just played, 23.8 fantasy points and 10.6 fantasy points in a full PPR format. So this guy gave you one great week, which is the week I said to start him, and then he gave you a week that didn't sink your week, but obviously wasn't as great and wasn't going to win you a week like it would have a couple weeks back. Versus New England and versus Green Bay, those were the 2 opponents that he played. So it's important to keep those 2 in mind because New England, their defense isn't atrocious, but they are versus running backs. 31st versus running backs in fantasy football, and Green Bay's is about middle of the pack. They're 15th versus running backs here. Well, this week they're just taking on a much stiffer defense versus the running back position in fantasy football. Philadelphia is the 4th ranked defense versus the running back position. This is no cakewalk for Tank Bigsby this week. And he's also been limited by an ankle injury so far in practice this week. And add on top of that, Travis Etienne, the Jags are kind of thinking, yeah, he's probably going to be back this week. They like his chances of coming back. So you put all those things together. Limited player on a week where they're taking on a much tougher defense with the rightful RB1 back, Travis Etienne. It's not going to be a good week. There's just too many things piling up here for Tank Bigsby to overcome this week. With Travis Etienne, the injury, and the matchup, I would just say to stay away from Tank Bigsby this week. Going down to our next guy right here. Lots of hype, Diontae Johnson. Diontae Johnson, obviously the big trade this week was that he got sent to the Baltimore Ravens for very, very little capital in exchange, which I find really interesting. They're taking on the Denver Broncos in Baltimore this week. So obviously it's nice for Diontae as a player to get up out of Carolina, get out of losing football, and actually go to a winning football team. I'm sure he as a player is very happy that he's going to win actual football games here. This sucks for fantasy football, and I really haven't seen a ton of people dispute that because I think everybody understands this is just not good in terms of fantasy football. Diontae Johnson is going to be in a situation where he's going to pull targets away from Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman, his upside is probably going down the tubes. Diontae Johnson is apparently likely to play immediately for the Baltimore Ravens. He was a full participant in practice, not listed on the injury report as he has been injured the past several weeks for the Carolina Panthers here. Diontae Johnson, even though he's going to play, this is just not going to be a good week for him versus Denver. They are 7th versus wide receivers, and obviously, the main reason being Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain is the ultimate lockdown corner in the NFL right now. He's been shutting down number ones everywhere. So this is the deal. He's going to stick with Diontae. Pat Surtain will stick with Diontae, not Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers lines up more in the slot than Diontae Johnson does. Diontae Johnson spends a lot of his games on the outside, whether it was with Pittsburgh or with Carolina. He's mostly been an outside receiver and been able to cook the majority of corners on good route running. This is not a week for Diontae Johnson to go through here. And let's just address the 3 big trades that have happened so far this season. DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper, and now Diontae Johnson. Well, the first week with DeAndre Hopkins and Amari Cooper on their new team, Amari hit, but DeAndre Hopkins did not. So that's 1 out of 2 that did well in their first week with their new team. Diontae Johnson's going to make it 1 out of 3 because the matchup stinks, and I don't think that this Baltimore offense has enough passing volume to support 2 wide receivers on a weekly basis, especially when that wide receiver 1 is going up against Pat Surtain in the Denver Broncos. The dropping down to our running back here that I don't think is going to be a good play either. Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys at the Atlanta Falcons this week. Rico Dowdle coming off the illness. That's why he missed the game on Sunday night versus San Francisco 49ers, or so they say, according to some theories out there that think he may have just been benched and made a healthy scratch. Whatever the case may be, he obviously did not play. If you actually look at his last 3 games, though, Rico Dowdle's been pretty good. Like, very, very playable. 13.1 fantasy points, 18.4, and 10.5 fantasy points in a full PPR format. I mean, you could do a lot worse than that over the last 3 games that he has been active and actually playing for the Dallas Cowboys. Look at it closer, though. Let's look at this one closer. So in those 3 games, he handled 11 carries, 20 carries, and 5 carries. So the big game he had 20 carries, and he actually ran the ball pretty well. He averaged, he had almost 90 yards as a whole on the ground, and he did look really good. But the other 2 games, like 11 and 5 carries, that's not getting it done. So how did he equate to that amount of fantasy points on that little volume? Well, there was 2 games in there that he was saved by a reception touchdown, and one of those games he was saved by 6 targets and 5 receptions, because the 2 games that he had the receiving touchdowns in, they were like 2 targets, 1 target in that game. The receiving volume just hasn't been there consistently for Rico Dowdle here. And here's something that I've preached throughout the year. Like the entire year, Dallas, their team under Mike McCarthy as a head coach, they tend to stray away from the run a lot of times in actual NFL games. And here's the thing. Atlanta is not going to have trouble scoring on Dallas's broken defense this week. Their offense has been potent over the last month and a half of football. They're not going to have problems scoring against Dallas. So what's going to happen here? Dallas is going to have to keep up. Atlanta's 15th versus running back. So again, not fantastic, not bad. But Dallas is going to drift from the run of this game because they're going to have to keep up. And Rico Dowdle just doesn't consistently get enough targets for him to sustain legitimate fantasy upside on a weekly basis. So this is just not a good play this week. But I'll tell you what is going to be a good play is Jalen Hurts this week on Underdog. This projection is 0.5 total yards for new customers only. This is one to hit the higher on, to get in on Underdog. Get your feet wet because Underdog is a lot of fun. Go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and use code FN to sign up for Underdog. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash, and you'll be able to take advantage of the sweat-free projection for Jalen Hurts on Sunday. Our next wide receiver that I want to go through today is someone that it kind of hurts me a little bit as well, Jalen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At the Kansas City Chiefs this week, obviously Jalen McMillan has been put into a position that I don't think he was ready for. Coming into the fantasy football season, he was actually one of my favorite sleepers over there in Tampa. But I liked him better when he had Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, and he was just simply the wide receiver 3, because this player is not a complete wide receiver. And last week proved it. In week 8, without Godwin and without Mike Evans, he had 7 targets in that game, but he only caught 4 of those catches for 35 yards versus a very, very beatable Atlanta secondary, I might add. That equates to 9.2 fantasy points in a full PPR format once you tack on the rush that he had for 17 total yards. So Jalen McMillan just didn't capitalize on the big plays that we needed him to capitalize on because, again, Jalen McMillan's not he's not a complete wide receiver here. Nobody expects him to be that. But obviously when you're put in this position as a wide receiver 1, especially with all the injuries that have happened in fantasy football, to the wide receiver position specifically, people are wondering and have asked me this week several times, can I start Jalen McMillan this week? This is not a week for Jalen McMillan. Kansas City is 4th versus the wide receiver position in fantasy football. Their defense in real life has been so much better than their defense in fantasy. A lot of people don't realize that. This defense is top tier right here. Again, this is more of a deep threat type of guy, and in this week versus a Steve Spagnuolo-led defense by the Kansas City Chiefs, this is just not his week. I like him better if he's playing the Jags defense, where he has an easier shot to do it, but this is not the week for Jalen McMillan to play. You put him on your bench. Our quarterback sit of the week. Big week last week, not going to happen this week. Jameis Winston of the Cleveland Browns. He's taking on the Los Angeles Chargers at home. So last week, let's just assess and also acknowledge that this guy is so night and day better than Deshaun Watson. Everybody understands that, and everybody was happy to see what happened last week. 25.56 fantasy points in a 4-point passing touchdown league. He was excellent last week. He threw 3 touchdowns and no interceptions here. But here's the thing to remember. It was versus Baltimore, who are horrendous against the pass. They're absolutely atrocious versus the pass. It's actually an anomaly, to be completely honest with you. This guy is still turnover prone as well. Jameis Winston is very turnover prone. Kyle Hamilton, who I love a lot over in Baltimore, he dropped one of the easiest interceptions I've seen all year. It was right there for him, and he had like multiple attempts to actually bring it down, and he didn't do it, and Jameis put it right on the money to Kyle Hamilton. This guy is not avoiding interceptions for this many more weeks. It's going to happen this week. I can probably almost guarantee you this one. This is a lower over-under as well, and the Chargers, they are 5th versus quarterbacks. They are not letting a lot of points happen. A lot of these Chargers games are low-scoring games. So I'm just not expecting a ton of points in this matchup. And I will say this. Jameis Winston will be starter viable in future weeks, but this is not a matchup-proof guy. The matchup last week, that was advantageous. This matchup this week, that is not an advantageous one versus the Chargers here. So I'm staying away. I'm not saying that he's a streaming quarterback this week. And our tight end sit of the week here, Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots at the Tennessee Titans this week. Not only is this one of the most boring games of the entire week, I mean, this one's going to be like a plug my nose and watch this type of this game situation here. Hunter Henry has actually done pretty well over the past month. He's become Drake May's top target when Drake May is out there. 5 targets, 9 targets in 2 full games with Drake May. 13.1 fantasy points and 17.2 fantasy points in a full PPR format is what that's equated to. So 2 straight weeks with Drake May, he actually was a really good start at the tight end position. Last week, here's what he did with May and Jacoby Brissett, because if you remember, Drake May left the game early because he was concussed. 9.5 fantasy points in that week. He also had 6 targets, so again, not too bad. There's a couple problems this week. First of all, Drake May is probably not going to play this week. Now, I've seen like maybe an outsider's chance that he plays. Mayo says that he's progressing through the concussion protocol, but right now it's unlikely because not many players have played this year the week after they suffered a concussion. It's probably not going to happen. Tennessee is also 4th versus the tight end position, so they are a good tight end defense in fantasy football. I'll say this, if Drake May plays, he's not a must-sit. I want to make that 100% clear for people. If May ends up playing, he's still a lower-end play, but if it is Jacoby Brissett, Hunter Henry is the guy that you just want to stay away from this week. So let me know how your team was looking so far this weekend. If you want to see who the must-start players are this week, click on this video right here.